welcome back to another episode of Tech Pro Unicorn. I am Michael Grace, your host, and today I am joined by Marty Strong. Marty is a retired Navy SEAL officer and combat vet, a novelist, a CEO and chief strategy officer, speaker and consultant with one new business leadership book set for release in early January, Be Nimble, How the Creative Navy SEAL Mindset Wins on the Battlefield and in Business, and a second business strategy book due for release in late summer 2022, Be Visionary. He traveled to over 40 countries. He's been shot at. Luckily, he's survived cancer twice and experienced the loss of his son. Marty has spent a lifetime in three professions, anticipating crisis and leading through chaos successfully. Marty, thanks for sharing your story. Thanks for being here with us on the podcast.
Well, thanks, Mike.
One of the cool things as I was cyber stalking Marty is as an author, he's kind of cross genres, right? People either write books about a topic and they become an expert and they expound about leadership or success or such. And Marty has, and you don't think of Navy SEALs. You think of Navy SEALs as, I think we all have a picture of what Navy SEALs are. And you don't picture them as fiction writers, and kind of the creative mind necessarily. You have a couple books out. It's the SEAL Strike series and the Time Warriors sagas. Could you talk to us a little bit just about those books before we get into the Be Nimble book?
Sure. And, to your point, I think a misconception, especially about special ops from movies and television shows, kind of the common approach that the media uses, is that you're more like a robot. You're very structured and disciplined and mission focused, like a missile that's been programmed. And it's actually the opposite. The screening process is looking for very dynamic, creative, highly intelligent, by IQ test individuals that also are very psychologically resilient. And that combination of resiliency and and the creativity, you end up with really funny guys. You laugh about everything. It's also a great way to change the subject if the subject is you're freezing your butt off or you're getting shot at. So if you're around a bunch of SEALs and you happen to be on the edge of a group of SEALs interacting, it sounds like a comedy roast. It's a nonstop running, set of jokes and digs on each other. The other thing that I think a lot of people might not appreciate, you see in the movies they have these beautiful, target mock-ups of the bad guy's castle or whatever. We never had any of that. And what you basically do is you storyboard out the mission on a whiteboard, and you have steps of performance to get from where you're standing when you start the process to the day that you're picked up and hopefully successful in doing the mission. And it's a very creative process because there's 7 or 8 or 9 or 10 different ways you can get in. You can fly in, you can jump in, you can come in a submarine and lock out, you can come in a mini submarine, surface boat, you can come in by train, plane. I mean, those are choices. You work all those different options out, and then how are you going to get from that point where your feet dry in the bad guys on the bad guys turf to the target, and then what do you do at the target? There might be 50 or 60 different ways to skin that apple. So you end up with a very collaborative storyboarding process, mission planning. You get it all done. It's all documented. You go out and rehearse it. You come back and then you brief it like it's a foregone conclusion. Anybody who's ever watched anything about making movies realizes that the original script gets rewritten about 5,000 times, sometimes daily while they're making the movie. Well, it's the same thing with the SEAL teams. So you end up going on the mission, and nothing is the way they said it was going to be, and therefore your plan is defunct, and you just make it up as you go, which also requires some kind of quick creativity. So I spent most of my career in the Navy doing technical writing, so I had some discipline in writing. That's something anybody learned in school, outlining, kind of setting a theme, things like that. But most of the writing was to compel or influence somebody to make a decision, kind of like a proposal. A mission presentation is a proposal. Sometimes you're in competition with other special operations units, or sometimes you're in competition with other forces. Like, do we use a plane? Do we use a missile? Do we use the SEALs? So I had a lot of experience at doing that. Fast forward about 8 years ago, I decided that I was going to do some writing after reading the 4 Hour Work Week, and the um, the objective there was to try to figure out what your bucket list was and live your bucket list now. It's Tim Ferriss's book. And my bucket list was completely different than what he had in the book. He had all places to go. It was all trips. Well, already been to all these countries and multiple times in some cases. What I wanted to do is I wanted to learn to play the guitar. I wanted to learn to speak Spanish fluently, and I wanted to write a fiction book, and I wanted to be able to write a business book. So I started with the fiction book idea, and I thought I'd write something about the SEALs. And then I thought, well, I've got a security clearance. I really don't know if I want to write about that. What do I really want to write about when I write about the SEALs in a novel? And I wrote down kind of the warrior ethos, the brotherhood, the feeling of camaraderie, the sense of humor I was mentioning.
Hmm.
Um, and there is a sense of humor in knowing that you're going through all the dog and pony steps of creating this beautiful, beautifully scripted plan that anybody with any experience knows is just going to go right in the toilet the second you step out of the airplane or step off the boat. But you play along, because the senior people want to see that. They all want to feel like they've got a sense of comfort and surety that there's a plan. Um, and when I wrote all these attributes down, I thought, is there some other way I can address them in a novel? And I came up with the idea of a science fiction book. I could make up the rules. I didn't have to, attribute any of this to a particular, to SEALness or the
Hmm.
military or topical events, ISIS or anything like that. And I could really be kind of a free range writer. So the first books I started writing were the Time Warrior sagas.
I love it. When I looked at it, and especially the SEAL Strike series, I'm like, ooh, here's a SEAL leader writing about, the SEAL Strike series. You answered part of my question, but well, like, was that drawn really from actual events? I mean, you've been deployed in the field with a team of SEALs, on mission. Um, which again, that movie aspect, you're like, oh, that sounds so exciting, and maybe it was, maybe it wasn't, but how much of like those books are from your personal or your team's experience?
Well, when I decided I was comfortable in shifting over, what I realized was I was comfortable writing characters and writing storylines and subplots and plots that didn't have to be kind of your cookie cutter normal military story.
Mm.
And it didn't have to be about what's happening right this second. So I went ahead and came up with a main character, the protagonist, Matthew Barrett, who is a brand new young officer in the SEAL teams in the first book. Now, I was not a brand new young officer in the SEAL teams. I did 10 years as an enlisted SEAL. I was a senior enlisted SEAL when I went to officers candidate school. And then I finished out the second 10 years as an officer. And I was not a bright-eyed, bushy-tailed Navy ensign who didn't know which way to go to get to the bathroom, because the learning curve for a brand new SEAL officer is huge, and there's lots of mistakes and there's lots of humility waiting for you. And it wouldn't have been a very exciting book if I did that part of it based on my experience.
Sure.
I didn't want the person to be competent and not have a whole lot of challenges right away. So if your challenge is just getting your pants on the right way, you have an exciting future. And I knew I had a couple books in me if I could start with that kind of character. So Matthew Barrett is not me, but what I did do, I was a BUDS instructor as an enlisted chief. I ran the first phase where the selection process, the famous Hell Week, and all that is, and observed that for several years. And then I came back later as an officer and ran the land warfare or third phase of that same basic course. And so I had experiences there, and then obviously I had experiences in the regular SEAL team environment, peacetime and also in wartime. So I was able to take all those different real experiences and kind of weave them in. Usually I changed the location, so anybody that even was with me would not really recognize if we were in Norway. I'm describing it in a book that's happening in the jungles of Colombia, but the thing that happened in Norway, I'm having happen in Colombia. So it's factually true and accurate. I don't really had to. I didn't have to make anything up really,
That's awesome.
except for dialogue.
It's so those seem really interesting. I think for our fiction readers, but then you pivoted, right, and you had a position and something to say around leadership. And the book that's coming out, Be Nimble. Uh, how you attributed the Navy SEAL experience and the leadership training essentially that was instilled into you and brought that to bear in the business world. Can you maybe talk a little bit about what Be Nimble is and how that Navy SEAL aspect applies?
So the gist of the book is basically answer the question you just asked, and that is what conveys from being a military leader in general or being a leader of Navy SEALs specifically over to the business world and the leadership in the business world. And the thing that I realized when I sat down to write the book was that the ability to be nimble, agile, open minded, to have intellectual humility were things that were pounded into us in the SEAL teams because if you started to rest on your laurels or started to get into a football play mindset that this next stop is going to be just like the last stop, you were setting yourself up for failure because the bad guys are watching and they're learning your football play. So you always want to look at everything, every target set completely, if you can, fresh with a fresh pair of eyes and take in the information that you're given, but realize when you get there, you got to keep your eyes open because a lot of the stuff you're told from what a satellite can see or something else
Mm-hmm.
doesn't turn out to be the same. I'll tell you what, the Rocky Mountains from space don't look like the Rocky Mountains. So you can be told you're going to go in there and it's going to be an easy 2 hour walk or whatever, and you get in there and the little ripples and hills turn out to be 6,000 foot elevation, climbs
Mm-hmm.
and ravines and that kind of stuff is what you experience, and therefore you get used to being comfortable with the game changing and the information changing, and you having to lead through those changes. So now you jump forward to business, and business, whether it's self-imposed, like you have a plan to grow. So scaling a business is a constant state of change, self-inflicted change.
Mm-hmm.
People are growing out of their depth. You need to add new talent. You need to grow and train current talent to do new things or maybe two new other tasks, two other categories of tasks, so you can multitask the talent that you have. You're moving all the time. You're growing in space. You're trying to evolve your business model. And the competition isn't the enemy. The competition is the world global environment, business environment. It's the economics involved globally and in the United States. And it could be regional. It's definitely by industry and then by a smaller marketplace. And then within that marketplace, sure, there's somebody across the street that's trying to eat your lunch, and you have to focus on that too. So it all worked. It all kind of
Mm-hmm.
conveyed when I sat down, thought, what can I offer as far as advice about the way I lead and the way I teach, train, mentor, and coach other leaders. And that's the gist of it.
I love it. Some of the greatest mentors that I've had have been prior military. Most of them, officers, leaders of people. And I think for folks that haven't experienced, a modern day military, there's a lot of training that goes into that, and people are really truly developed and I think there's that stereotype of, oh, it's the military, and it's just like this foreign thing on the side. And I mean, some of the, like I said, the greatest mentors I've had have been prior military leaders of people with really great ideas that do translate, and they become great leaders in business and very entrepreneurial, and they lead large companies. It's just it makes total sense to me everything you just said about how those skills, especially if you think about where our elite forces are, the SEALs are probably the up there with maybe the Rangers, or I'm trying to think of
Sure, the Green
the
Berets,
yeah
the Marsoc Marines. They're called the Marine Raiders again. Yeah, there's a lot of units. Elite fighter pilots, elite bombing crews. I mean, those elite units are selected, and that's the other part that I think I talked to a little bit in the book, but it bears, I guess, repeating here is we were the recipients of millions of dollars of taxpayers' money. I mean, when one of my SEALs broke an ankle, all I had to do was wait a couple minutes, and somebody down the hallway in the operations office issued me another $2 million SEAL, fully trained, ready to go, motivated, mission focused. With whatever if that guy who just broke his ankle was a medic or a communications expert, they gave me a medic or a communications expert. I did not have to go, to careerbuilder.com, or I didn't have to go into LinkedIn and say, hey, I'm looking for somebody. And I didn't have to have all kinds of long interviews to figure out whether they fit culturally, or what's their work
Yeah.
ethic like, or would they multitask, or could they work with other people, or they want to be more comfortable in a cubicle staring at a to-do list. That's the reality outside of the military. And I didn't realize it initially, but after a while, I saw that was a huge difference. And
Hmm.
that's been another, other than the scaling, dealing with the stress of rapidly changing organization structures and things. The other kind of category of leadership challenges has been talent. Being
Hmm.
able, because you don't get, SEAL officers, military officers don't have that as a feather in their cap. They never have to have that struggle like a business owner does, or a business leader. They just get it issued to them. So, yeah, developing leaders and developing, subordinate leaders, and developing management teams and technical teams. It's a lot of fun for me, and it's challenging, and it's something you're always doing, configuring and reconfiguring when you're growing companies. But there's just a different mix outside of uniform, and rightly so. I mean, they're not coming to work because they're trying to stop, the enemy
Hmm.
from taking over the United States. It's not that level of life and death commitment.
Right.
It's taking care of their family. So yeah, it's a little bit different, and that
Oh,
part does not convey from the military.
right. I love that. We have a lot of folks talk about um, talent, right? And we don't really usually talk about like acquiring the talent. It's usually like, how do I invest, train, develop, build a culture that the talent wants to stay. And after talking to lots of people in the industry about it, people follow leaders. People follow. Yes, your company culture is very important, but people stay because they're inspired by a leader. Usually, somebody who they want to learn from, they want to watch and observe and be associated with. Um, and so when we go kind of flipping into the business side. Um, Companies are trying to figure this out, right? It's a weird time. Companies are trying to figure out how do they, set a better strategy. How do they navigate through all the insanity that's happening in the world today? All these outside external forces that are, essentially attacking their business model and forcing them to be nimble. To paraphrase the book, but why is it important for companies to kind of have a strategy and make sure that they're on point there?
So the subtitle for my second book, Be Visionary, is Strategic Leadership in the Age of Optimization. So I'm going to answer your question by saying that I think you don't know you're missing strategy if you've never seen strategy in action, and it's never been a part of the culture of the leadership of an organization. You don't even know you're missing it. It's like, people from an impoverished country showing up and not even realizing they're missing, the ability to do live streaming football games or something on a handheld device. I mean, they don't even know how to ask for it. So what's happening or it's happened in the last 15, 20 years, I think it's driven mostly by the optimization enhancement of technology, the ability to measure at a very micro level frequently, and kind of regurgitate it in formatted reporting, et cetera, dashboards, et cetera. And everybody gets that, and everybody sees that as immediate gratification. They, okay, this is the way to lead. Well, this is kind of like leading if you're in your car and you just put your face up against the dashboard and watched all the displays. You didn't look out the windshield at all. You just, You just look, well, okay, I got my gas, my speed, what's the radio set on, you know. So when you're that close, when optimization becomes strategy, you're essentially like somebody who's standing there looking really, really closely at a Lincoln Head penny on a railroad track, trying to figure out what the year says, and they don't even see or hear the train that hits them
Hmm.
because they never look up. They say the mission is micro efficiency, hyper focus on optimization, and then if anybody comes along and says, "Hey, let's talk about what might happen 2 weeks from now," they sound like an idiot or crazy or both. So
Hmm.
strategy is out of vogue right now. It's in books. It's you hear about it in the military and things like that. But what I think is strategy is the ability to look out to the future and envision what you see you can be, whether it's as an individual strategy or an organizational strategy. Envision what the best you is or the best organization is or your place in the universe at some point in the future. And when you take the time, and I encourage people in leadership positions to do this about 20 minutes a day, believe it or not, to just think bigger thoughts and get out of the mindset of always looking at the tips of your toes and tracking your to-do list. You start looking out the horizon, you start looking around, you start seeing things. You see other companies, you see other opportunities, you see windows and doors opening, and you see some maybe closing by the time you get to the horizon. You're at the end of a trend, or you're at the beginning of a trend. And you start seeing the world that way. And you say, well, how am I positioned to become that person or that organization I want to be and that I envision? And that starts to give you the ability to create an operational plan to get from point A to point Z. You can optimize your butt off in between. That's fine. But optimizing for the point of making each of those milestones in an operations plan that takes you from something that is now to a much, much better normal down the road. That's strategy as far as I'm concerned.
I'm smiling because I just love, right. So here at RPI, mid-sized consulting firm, I lead our practice area called Strategic Services, and I'm always talking strategy. And I have a saying that I use called "stuck at start," right? And I'm like, you go into a customer and they're like, "Hey, we want to do this, that, and the other," and I'm like, "Okay, what's the strategy? What's the plan? Like, what are we trying to solve? What do we like? What's the end goal?" And they're like, "No, we just got to do this right now." And I'm like, "Stop doing, right? Just stop the noise. Let's sit down and let's create a roadmap and a strategy and a plan that's short, middle, long term, so that we have a guide, so that we have KPIs and we know what we're trying to." And everyone's like, "I love what you said. Strategy's out of vogue," because people are like, "No, we just want to do." I'm like, "You're just going to waste a ton of effort, and then you're going to come back and go, 'That didn't work. What should we do next?'" And then you'll do that 2 or 3 times, and then you'll come back and go, "We need a strategy." Ah, welcome back to the table. Now let's sit down and talk about strategy, because companies that run out there without strategy, they're doing stuff. They think they're being productive, right? They think they're being effective because there's all these activities going on, and when some of them might be aligned to an end goal, but a lot of them aren't. And action without a strategy, to me, creates a lot of waste.
Yeah. So think of it this way too. Everybody thinks they have a better handle on reality because of the amount of data points that are collected. But the data points they're collecting is about right now. Okay, right now. Okay, the ones that just happened and the ones that happened a week ago. What they're doing is they're just becoming more and more and more immersed in what is and was. And none of that data, if you look at the way the data is generated, very little of that data has anything to do with what's about to happen when you walk around the corner. It can't tell you whether you're about to get hit by a car, you're going to bump into the woman that you end up marrying. It doesn't tell you anything about that. And if you never take your imaginative, creative mind and think out all those possible paths, hit by a car, meet a beautiful woman, get bit by a dog, nothing happens. If you don't start running through those scenarios in your mind, you're basically equal to everybody else. The differentiator, I think, now and going forward, are companies, organizations, and individuals that look to the future, analyze multiple different paths, pick a path that makes sense to an end state that they see as a satisfactory outcome, success defined, and then they start steering and fighting their way towards that. Now they have a purpose. Their purpose is to confirm what yesterday's data points said today might look like. Their purpose is to change the direction and change the angle of attack and the ascent angle for the organization. So if you think of it that way, anybody that's not thinking that way is basically just becoming experts. They're becoming historians essentially. They're historians about the way things have been, and that's great. But historians don't change the world. Steve Jobs did not ask all his engineers, tell me everything you know about how to put together a phone. He said, I have this idea for a phone the size of a wallet. Build it.
I
That's the
love
difference.
it. Yeah, I resonate with everything you just said. It's interesting to watch, and I think sometimes on podcasts and stuff and in books we make it seem like so simple. Oh, just do these four things, do these six steps, and there's all this environmental pressure. I just love your look forward kind of watch where you're driving, kind of analogy. I love the dashboard analogy. Because whenever we'll go into a company, they will always bring in all these reports, right? And they fill rooms with the reports, and they're like, look at this, and look at our trends, and look at and I'm just like, can I talk to somebody who tells me like what we're trying to do here? Like, where are we trying to go? What are we trying to solve? What's the problem? Um, and I usually wind up sitting in a C-level executive's office, and they have a clear vision, and then I just kind of look back at the people that they're trusting to get them there, and I'm like, oh, you got a problem. And it isn't like your product or whatever. It's you haven't clearly articulated the vision, right? You haven't given them a purpose. You haven't told the team effectively what that company is trying to become or do. And all these people, I've loved your analysis of data is the is and what was, because that's where people live. That's their comfort zone because it's historical. They thrive there versus the innovation analogy of like Steve Jobs.
Yeah, and they've been trained. They've been trained to think that way, and it's safe. If the
Mm-hmm.
computers spit out a picture postcard of what happened yesterday, who's to dispute it? All you have to do is just present it and say, "Look, it happened." You can live and die by the data of what happened yesterday. But what if what you did yesterday was an experiment and it didn't go well? And part of what you're trying to do is to break through with a new product or service, whatever. In an optimization-driven organization where optimization is strategy, you might get fired. But in an organization that their goal is to become innovative and creative and break through the white noise of their competition, you might get promoted or get a bonus because you're a risk taker. You're trying, and the data shows that you tried, you failed, but that's okay. At least you tried. The other 10 people that are being tracked didn't try because they're being safe. So you tend to reward the things that align with the strategy instead of rewarding the things that don't. You compare and contrast opportunities. I often say that a strategy, if you think of it like a cardinal direction, we're going to go 360 degrees north, and something pops up. If I want to create a new powerhouse running football team, and somebody comes up and says, "Hey, we can get this fantastic wide receiver. He's a first draft pick, and he's going to cost us this much," then I could say, "That's great. Sounds like a good player. What does he have to do with us building a team that's a powerhouse running team?" It doesn't align. You see,
Yeah.
and those are the choices that people make all day, and until they realize that they're supposed to compare what they think is an opportunity or a threat to what their path is and where they're going, they will always try to drag it to where their comfort zone is, and that's a senior C-suite responsibility once they've put that flag on that far hill to keep everybody steering that way and keep all the chickens kind of moving in that direction and not letting them all kind of separate. It's called strategic
Mm-hmm.
coherence. The coherence is whatever the strategy is, it's coherent all the way back through the operational planning, the milestones, and daily execution. And you don't have somebody over here on the left going off in some weird tangent, spending resources and time and everything.
Mm-hmm.
The other thing that's a casualty of this is investment in general, but investment in people specifically. Why do I have to invest in anybody when I'm not going to really change much? If I knew I was going to do business in a foreign country and my techs couldn't speak that language, I might want to invest in hiring people that could speak that language, or get my techs up to a point where they could speak passable, whatever the language is. I would start to have a plan to invest, and that means I'm laying out money, resources, and spending cash, betting on the future benefits, the return on investment based on my strategy. There is no ROI if you're not thinking forward, because the investment doesn't make any sense. Because why do I need to get a bunch of people that can speak Spanish or Portuguese or Farsi? Or it doesn't make any sense. So we're not going to. And we're not going to take Joe or Bob or Susie and send them to get an MBA, because what would we need an extra MBA around here that happens to know our business model? The status quo and optimization, measuring the status quo, has killed the idea of investing, which is a risk for a lot of companies, and most companies, especially small companies, has killed the initiative to invest in people.
Hmm. So true. And seeing at companies of all sizes for sure. Um, leaders have their hands full right now, trying to lead companies, trying to lead people, trying to retain a workforce. Right? There's just so many external pressures on companies, and thus on those leaders. Um, as someone who coaches leaders in both military and in the business world, do you have some just tips on leadership, how to be a better leader and improve?
So I think the the black swan event of the pandemic kind of brings home in a big, illustrious, and impossible to ignore way that change happens all the time. So everybody had to change. Now, we all had to change in a macro sense, but a lot of us had to change in a micro sense. It shattered belief systems in the business world. It shattered business models. It rewarded companies that were kind of aligned. They had the surfboard laying there waiting for the wave, and then the wave came. Like Zoom and other companies that took advantage of remote learning and remote work.
Hmm.
But it crushed other brick and mortar structures and very stagnant business models that weren't very flexible or reliant on distribution systems that worked perfectly and people showing up at stores or showing up at work. They didn't have cloud-based platforms in place when this happened. So how do you run your business if nobody can tap into the accounting system? So these are all things that were brought to the forefront, but they've been around forever. This has been a part of running organizations, military organizations, governments, empires, as far back as people can look in history. Things change. It's not always a disaster that causes it, but when a disaster comes along, suddenly we have a collective epiphany, and we start challenging the way it was before before it happened. And sometimes we go back to the old ways because they still make sense, but a lot of times we don't. And whether it's World War II and the American Civil War, the American Revolution, all these kinds of things, the discovery of America, all these things change things radically from that point forward. A leader, first and foremost, has to be humble enough that they understand that's the way the world is, and whatever they learned in college and whatever they learned at their last job, and maybe whatever they learned 2 weeks ago, may be moot. And if they rely on it, especially if they rely on their success, or if they rely, they think too much and dwell too much about their failures, they are going to basically impede their ability to lead well tomorrow, because you don't know what tomorrow is going to bring. But whatever it does, you better analyze it and see it clearly, and don't muddy it up with all this other baggage from what's going on in your past. And I always tell people it would be ridiculous if I asked you a question for you, if you went to college 20 years ago, for you to go run back to your house, bring out your college notes about European economy before there was a European Common Union or anything, because the answer would be BS. It wouldn't matter anymore. It's all changed. But that's what
Hmm.
people do. They rely on their education, however dated it is. The last time they did something successfully, the last time they were awarded emotionally, the last time they failed emotionally. I just say clear that baggage out as a leader. understand your job is to lead when change happens.
Hmm.
Managers manage the status quo. Leaders are important to look forward and anticipate change and plan for it, but they're also there when something happens internally or externally that shakes or rocks the systems, processes, and the talent you have in place, and you need a new normal. You need a new beginning. That's when leadership is really required. Then you get it back on track. Then you start managing again.
I, I, I just love that analogy. Lead when change happens. Right. I tell people that say that they're leaders, right? And they go, oh, this is hard and this and this and this. Yeah, leadership is hard. It's an honor. It's a privilege to lead. It, I, you know, managing to me is kind of easy, right? That's the status quo. That's the maintenance mode. I know what's going to happen. That's a predictability. Leadership, especially leading people through change or through a tumultuous time, whether it's, being under fire or a rather large organizational change or an acquisition or a merger and acquisition. To me, those are, they have a lot of similarities. That one person or that group of people stand up and say, follow me, I have the way, I have a plan, and people coalesce around that and they follow that individual.
And that's another term concept that's been convoluted over the years, just like strategy versus efficiency or optimization. If you went back 150 years and you walked into any town, anywhere probably in the Western world for sure, and you asked somebody, you pointed to a person in a dry goods store that was inventorying materials and moving things around, and they were in charge. If you said, "Is that a leader?" they'd laugh at you. They knew the difference. And then if a bunch of, let's say, a tornado came
Mm-hmm.
in and destroyed half the town, and the sheriff and the mayor and a couple other people all got together and started rallying people to put fires out and get water, do this, do that, set up an aid station, they'd say that's leadership. Okay, there was no confusion. There's nothing wrong with management, and a lot of good leaders can shift back and forth from managing the status quo
Mm-hmm.
and then leading. The problem about scaling is you're the disruptor. So if you want to grow, you've already decided you're going to break what you built, right? And that
Yeah,
sucks. I tell you, it sucks. You put all the effort into designing it, anticipating it, creating it, populating it, preparing, training, getting everybody ready, getting it up on step, optimizing it, managing it, break it. Let's do it again. You have to keep recreating those little S curves of growth. And every time you're basically walking in there and busting it. And but that is a good kind of sync, or I guess sequential action. You design, you develop, you build, you manage, and then you, as part of a leadership, you envision, you design, you build, develop, then you manage. Of course, if a crisis happens, that's a leadership function. That's not a management function.
I love it. I want to point out, just Marty's dropped lots of really cool things. I love all your analogies on leadership. Um, when we kind of hint towards the book, and we spent a bunch of time even foreshadowing kind of the Be Visionary book due out later in 2022. The novels, just share a little bit. I prior to this call, we were talking about the novels, and then the Be Nimble and Be Visionary. But the novels have a special place, kind of in your heart, in your mission personally. Marty doesn't profit from the novels. That goes to a charity. Maybe you want to just share a little bit about that, because it's important.
Sure. Well, I didn't start writing the novels to try to make additional income, and I just thought, I've been donating to different military causes for a while, and I decided that I would devote the time, the effort, and the proceeds to the SEAL Veterans Foundation. The SEAL Veterans Foundation is managed by the UDT SEAL Association, which has been around since about 1970, and they have several programs in there. I have the money that I send them earmarked for a program called the MLAP program. It focuses on PTSD um, survivors, patients, people that don't know they have it, but they need to get evaluated, but also traumatic brain injury. And the the checks I send, they're not millions of dollars, but it's after 8 books now, it's actually added up. My wife pointed out the other day, we went and dropped the check off, and so the that's what I do, and that's it. I don't think about it when I'm writing, but it's rewarding at the end of the day to know. I've actually had some people that I've met that, and one person actually works for me, that went in and went into that program and ended up getting rated for disability for brain injury and some other things that were never picked up back when he retired several years ago. And he started telling me about what happened, and the program and all that. I go, really, the MLAT program? So that was kind of cool. That was a good feedback loop for me.
It's awesome. This podcast is being recorded on Giving Tuesday. Just a reminder, and I mean, what a cool cause! What a great place to, if you're still looking for an opportunity to give, as you come to the year end. That foundation helping the Navy SEALs sounds, just it just kind of warms my heart, right? Sometimes, and I love the story because sometimes you donate and you go, I don't really know where that went. I hope it helps something. I love that you designate down to a program that's meaningful, that you can see direct results from. Another great way to donate, right, is if you're one of those folks that like, well, I want to donate, but I kind of want a little something, something in return for my donation. Buying some of Marty's novels, could essentially is just a pass through. You get a great book. And then the profits go to that foundation. So I
Right.
just wanted to highlight that because I think it's unique. Again, I'm kind of fascinated. I talk to a lot of authors, and to have an author write in kind of both sides of the fence is very unique. So, Marty, thanks for spending the time and sharing all the knowledge that you did. I'm excited about Be Nimble. These are all kind of available if you're. They all have a bunch of different websites. I'll put them in the links down below. But Marty can be reached at Marty Strong, Be Nimble, all one word.com. And he's available for speaking. You can get his books. You can see the podcasts and such that he's been on. There's some articles out there. There's lots of good content. And then you can follow his journey as the next book releases, Be Visionary, in the summer of 2022. And I can't think of, if I just summed up these books, Be Nimble and Be Visionary, you're like, yeah, I need to do that. Those sound like pretty important things for companies and for leaders to do, relevant to the time for sure that we're in here in 2021, coming to the end. So thank you for creating that content, inspiring leadership, and sharing your personal journey.
Well, thanks for having me on, Michael. It's been fun.
Absolutely.